Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out to the launch of our campaign for rare disease treatment in Ontario, and to hear from some of those whose ongoing concerns with government support for rare disease are clear representations of what we'll be trying to address. For too many years now, we've seen too many patients and groups forced to plead with government for life-saving and life-transforming treatment for rare disease. In the last year alone, I've sponsored this media studio for families suffering from a series of rare diseases, unique and yet shared, families whose heart-wrenching stories cry out for government's attention and action, and yet despite words of understanding from government when they are on their doorstep, continue to wait for support. Today we are here to share stories from real Ontarians that happen to suffer from or with a rare disease. And they are here to share their experiences in tackling the system to get the support and care we all would expect from our province. As we've learned, when it comes to rare disease, these families are just the tip of the iceberg. Rare diseases or orphan diseases are those that affect a small percentage of the population. And while the percentages may be small, it shouldn't mean government can go along ignoring their suffering. With family members and loved ones taken into account, there are as many as 1 in 12 people in Ontario impacted by rare disease, according to CORD. And if it is that 1 in 12 that we are here on behalf of today. For far too long, rare disease sufferers have faced endless hurdles to diagnosis, to referral, or out-of-country treatment to approved medication due to their smaller numbers and higher relative treatment costs. But these are people of Ontario just like you and me, and the higher costs shouldn't mean rare disease sufferers are abandoned by their government. That leaves them to fund their own medical expenses. That's why I am today officially launching my campaign to treat rare disease and announcing my private member's motion calling on the government to strike a select committee into rare disease treatment in Ontario. Specifically, the motion, which I'll be debating February 25th, will call for an all-party committee to tour the province, hear from experts, medical professionals, sufferers and their families, and use that first-hand experience to develop meaningful, lasting recommendations for treatment of rare disease here in the province of Ontario. Today represents the first step of many in my call for answers on rare disease treatment, and a step that is complemented by the launch of our website, treatraredisease.ca, which you can see on the screen to my left. The website will be one way people can help to build the momentum toward our private members' motion and select committee process, sharing stories like those we'll hear today, writing or tweeting their MPPs, and learning more about the facts and concerns surrounding rare disease treatment in this province. It's live now, and I encourage those here and watching to log on to treatraredisease.ca to join our call. This isn't about one disease receiving support or another not. Today, it's about taking those first important steps toward change, and it begins with the sufferers and their families. Today, it begins with Ian Stedman, a board member of the Canadian Organization for Rare Diseases and a longtime sufferer with Muckle-Wells disorder. Ian will start us off where most rare disease stories start, with diagnosis and the hurdles sufferers face to even get diagnosed in the first place. Ian.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. My name's Ian Stedman. I'm 34 years old, and I was diagnosed with a rare disease at the age of 32. I lived my whole life experiencing a host of symptoms, ranging from fevers to headaches, arthritis, a full body rash, red eyes, and I was never able to obtain a diagnosis. I looked back at my records from my medical doctor, and I had visited him 176 times by the age of 18 for those individual symptoms, and it was never pieced together that there was some correlation between them. When I was 32, I had a daughter who's here in the room today but a little shy, and it was when she started presenting with the full body rash that I took it upon myself to start researching, because I realized it must have been genetic. And it was at the age of 32 that I was able to diagnose myself and my daughter and contact a doctor at Sick Kids to confirm the diagnosis. I lived my whole life covering my skin, covering my eyes, using eye drops, not knowing what was wrong with me, but just figuring it was the problem that I have. Everyone has something that they have to deal with, and that was what I had to deal with. I normalized the issue. It was 32 years, and now, through diagnosis, my daughter will not have to worry about that. We are the lucky ones. Our story is all too common of how long it took, but we are lucky because we have treatment. We don't have a cure, but we have treatment. But the journey to diagnosis was long, and I hope that through Mr. Harris's initiatives, we can change that for future patients. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. I'll ask Chantel Wilson of Brantford, a mother of 5 and a 3.5-year-old with EDS, to speak next.
Thank you. As a nurse of 12 years and a mother of 4, my 2 youngest children, aged 3.5 and 5, and my husband are diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I've been advocating for care to over 38 specialists for these people. Unfortunately, these specialists have failed to meet our children's needs. This is largely due to the lack of awareness and education about the disease that they live with. This in turn holds doctors back from being able to provide a treatment or an access to a care plan. Both my 3.5-year-old daughter and my 5-year-old son and my husband have hypermobility classical type Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. EDS is a multisystemic hereditary connective tissue disorder that is difficult to diagnose, treat, and care for. Symptoms can be mild to very life-threatening, and they complex with multi-syndromes representing a cluster of symptoms to being very life-threatening. Unfortunately, in both my children's cases, they are affected by multiple systemic issues. Our journey began with my daughter at 4 months of age, having multiple seizures a day, chronic constipation, absent visual maturation, and a delay in developmental milestones. And then our children started experiencing mobility and neurogenic bladder issues, as well as chronic pain that was worsening by the day. They constantly fell, and they walked with an inward toe. The only supports that were provided by specialists to us was to provide leg braces that go up to their knees for support and wheelchairs for mobility. Through our journey, we experienced specialist appointments that always resulted in one letdown after another, one misdiagnosis after another, constantly having tests reported as within the normal range or reports that were left unaddressed, all resulting in the same common response: no one has ever heard of or can treat this rare disease. We attended the ILC's Foundation and McMaster Medical Education, EDS, and Chronic Pain Conference in November 2014. This is when we finally started to feel supported. We learned from multidisciplinary specialists about the many syndromes that were related to EDS. It was there that we learned about tethered cord syndrome for a neurosurgeon in the United States. We then took our knowledge and challenged physicians here about my children's MRI results that were dismissed as being normal, when in fact the neurosurgeon from Rhode Island confirmed a tethered spinal cord in both my children. Our children since had had their tethered cords released by this neurosurgeon in Rhode Island with noticeable positive results in both of our children's mobility, leg pain, and weakness, and our son's incontinence has completely resolved. Sadly, our daughter continues to have incontinence of both bowel and bladder, but that's largely due to her neurogenic bladder, and she'll potentially always have irreversible nerve damage. None of this has been funded by OHIP, and this has left our family in huge financial stress. The hardest thing to watch as a parent is to see your child suffer with a chronic disease, to listen to them talk about their chronic pain, and to hear your 5-year-old describe it as a burning pain on his hands that feel like knives are slicing him across his forehead, down his tummy, and down his legs. You feel powerless and you don't know how to help. How he just wants to have just one day where he doesn't feel yucky and he can just be a little 5-year-old and play without any pain or fatigue. It's absolutely heart-wrenching.
Thank you, Chantel. Also joining us is Jennifer Hamilton, who has AHUS. Jennifer.
My name is Jennifer Hamilton, and I have an ultra-rare, life-threatening disease called AHUS. There's only about 30 people in Ontario suffering right now from this genetic condition. AHUS is caused by uncontrolled activity in the immune system that attacks the body's healthy cells, causing blood vessel damage and abnormal blood clotting. The disease can cause kidney failure, heart attack, stroke, and can even lead to death. It was in 1999 that I became very sick, and I was misdiagnosed with another ultra-rare disorder that was called TTP that has very similar symptoms to AHUS, but a very different treatment. After 6 weeks of plasma treatments, which are actually pretty horrific, and high doses of steroids, which are awful, I went home thinking that was it, and I was done. But it wasn't over. 2 years later, the disease came back, and another 6 weeks of exactly the same treatments followed. 5 years later, immediately following my son's birth, I relapsed again, stayed improperly diagnosed, and spent 2 months in the hospital, had plasma treatments, high-dose steroids, and developed chronic kidney failure. 1 year later, while going through the tests and meetings for an actual kidney transplant, I had yet another relapse. While doctors thought my disease was odd, they never even considered that I might have something other than TTP. This relapse lasted more than 4 months. I spent 4 months in the hospital without my son, who was a year old. I had more apheresis and more treatments and a very serious bout with pneumonia that the doctors didn't think I would survive, and I think a rather unnecessary surgery to remove my spleen. And then, finally, I went home. The following years were very difficult. I dealt with severe and chronic fatigue, chronic kidney failure, pneumonia, bronchitis, and many other health issues while raising my son. In 2013, a hematologist just decided that I should be tested for AHUS. The genetic blood work came back, and I was finally officially diagnosed. That same month, a new treatment for AHUS called Soliris was approved by Health Canada, and I was a candidate for the treatment. And the only reason I was able to have access to it was because my husband's insurance luckily covered it. Since I started the drug, my health has dramatically improved. I have had no relapses, and my kidney function has actually almost recovered to normal, and I no longer am in need of a transplant. Unfortunately, due to a change in circumstances, I will not have access to those health benefits much longer. My physician has applied for continued coverage through the Ministry of Health's interim funding criteria that was put in place last February, and I have been denied twice as my condition does not meet the current criteria. I wasn't diagnosed in the right time, I wasn't sick when I started the medication. There are an abundance of reasons why they won't give me the coverage, which means that I will soon no longer have access to Soliris. Without it, I will be at an extremely high risk for a relapse that could lead to major health risks, including complete kidney failure, daily dialysis, or possibly death. I am grateful for the private insurance coverage, but I am now in need, like many others, of public funding for the coverage of the drug in Ontario. For about 2.5 years, Ontario has had the opportunity to provide access to this treatment for patients like myself. The wait is unacceptable. This gap needs to be filled before more patients are put at risk. The province puts a lot of weight on cost effectiveness. However, it is important to realize that treatments for rare diseases are usually more expensive because of their rarity. This should not result in refusal of treatment. More emphasis should be given to health and quality of life instead of focusing on cost effectiveness. The province also needs to recognize that rare disease treatments, by their very nature, will never have the same volume of clinical data available as other common diseases. Having said this, rare disease patients deserve the same access to treatment as all other patients who have more common illnesses. No patient should have to deal with fighting for a drug that they actually require. I urge the Ministry of Health to supply Soliris to all AHUS patients that are in need of this treatment when their physician recommends it. Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming out today. You've heard the stories of those that we've brought here, and I'm sure you recall all those that have appeared in this room over the last year and years before that, highlighting the need for government action on rare disease across the province. Of course, I encourage you all to visit my website, treatraredisease.ca, and debate of my motion in February when the House returns, coinciding with, in fact, Rare Disease Day, and be happy to take any questions with that. Thank you.
Michael, can you talk a bit more about the challenges of fighting for people with rare diseases on a case-by-case basis, as you've been doing, rather than looking for some sort of, or rather than having some sort of overall strategy like you're pushing for?
Yeah, I mean, I've sponsored and I've seen so many families that have had to come through here to Queen's Park. We all remember Maddie Vanstone, on her fight to get Kalydeco, which was eventually covered, of course. We could host one of these every week, in fact, every day, on a specific rare disease that calls for specific action. And they're all different, whether it be out-of-province coverage, pharmaceutical, proper diagnosis. You know what? The government typically responds with something. We'll open up a review. We'll have a panel for this or that. And I think it's incumbent on and that's why I put forward the select committee to study all the different aspects of rare disease, including its proper definition, and how we go about fixing the problems with the processes to which these people go about getting help. Instead of a piecemeal approach, it's with that I think a select committee, it's worked before with developmental disabilities, mental health, And I think rare disease would offer an opportunity for all members of the House on all sides to come together to come up with a better way of dealing with it, because right now it's just that.
There's already a committee that looks at what disease should be treated and how. But what do you think is lacking in the actual process that we have now with the experts that we have now?
Well, we've heard that, in fact, some drugs are approved by Health Canada, but the criteria to access those, as Jennifer just stated, is extremely restrictive. There's in fact, and I know of a woman that has AHUS that needs a kidney transplant, and she in fact has a match, but that can't happen until her kidney, I guess, is at a proper strength, and that's the requirement of the drug in order for her to do that. So it's a bit of a catch-22. So the current process isn't working. You look at suffers from PKU, another rare disease that we've seen people come in here before as well. It's that criteria to which those people need to meet to get access to the drug that's the problem. And so, again, that's why we've put forward points to study for the select committee to see how we can better improve that process, because right now the current system isn't working.
As mentioned, has independent processes in place supposedly to ensure. How is it that you think that they are making cost such an important driver in their decisions if it's an independent process?
Well, there's no doubt that, as we heard this morning, AHUS comes at an extreme. Solaris is an extremely expensive drug, and there's no doubt that government looks at those costs. But we're talking about a rare disease and rare, individuals in Ontario. I don't know exactly what the numbers are, but we're not talking about a whole lot. But it shouldn't. You wouldn't think, if you're diagnosed with a cancer. And there's some expensive cancer drugs in the market out there to help these people, that they're looked after. Just because you have a rare disease and the drugs, of course, are expensive, doesn't mean you should have to foot the bill on your own. And in a lot of cases, these folks across Ontario are mortgaging their homes, cashing their life savings to treat their loved ones. And it shouldn't be that way at all. And so that's why, we've got a line item here that would study, what the Transparent Drug System for Patients Act, any changes that are necessary to better support Ontarians with rare diseases, the need for a committed funding envelope specific to drugs for rare disease, the implementation of the compassionate review policy for drugs for rare disease. These are all items that we will study as a committee and hear from actual patients that have had to go through the process to which they've been denied, to come up with a better way, because the current system isn't working.
What do you feel is the responsibility of the company in all of this? Like for Solaris, for example, we're talking about $500,000 to $700,000 per patient per year. They make a profit of about $2 billion a year. The CEO makes like $20 million a year. And there is a conflict right now with the province trying to get the price to be lower, I think. What do you think is the responsibility of them as well in this? Because it is quite expensive for
Sure it is. Well, look at, we as a government here canceled a gas plant that cost taxpayers $1 billion for nothing. We've wasted billions of dollars on electronic health files, and people still don't have electronic health records. You know what? We give millions of dollars to teachers' unions to negotiate collective agreements. That's the focus will be on where government dollars are best spent, and to deny these people who have a rare disease simply because of the cost, I don't think is a good enough answer for me. So, there will be an opportunity to speak to drug companies in this process and hear from them, and have committee members allow them to ask those very questions. I'm not going to, go about answering those questions now. That's what I hope to do when the select committee is happening. So I'll leave it at that.
And if I may ask, maybe to you that use the Solaris and see that it's an effective treatment, do you feel there's something unfair from maybe on the company perspective to place you in that middle of the fight there? Because obviously the company knows there is an emotional token there. There's something, everybody wants to help you, obviously. While the population is very sensitive to cases like this. And at the same time, some people would say maybe the company knows that. Do you feel sometimes you're being used yourself in this?
I don't think so. I think no matter what the cost, I think the government should be covering the drug. I don't think it should matter that it's $500,000 a year. They spend $500,000 a year on nothing. Why shouldn't they spend it on a drug? It shouldn't matter.
But do you think the company should have maybe a responsibility in this as well?
I don't think that's for me to say.
I think there's examples of pharmaceutical companies giving coverage to or for their drug on a compassionate reasons. Obviously these are rare diseases, and these companies are investing the money in research and development to ensure that it suffers from a rare disease like Jennifer can go about living and contributing to society like we would expect them to. For that, we're thankful. Of course, it comes at a cost, but what doesn't these days? And so it's up to the committee to look at ways on how we can make recommendations to the government, including, how we deal with some of these high-cost pharmaceuticals.
Michael, do you think you're getting through to the government a little bit? Because the health minister's formed that working group on EDS.
I know...
Is that kind of like a foot in the door for you? Like you feel like you're starting to make some kind of an impact with this?
You know what? There are thousands of rare diseases. In fact, hundreds, if not thousands, of Ontarians with a rare disease. EDS just being one of them. I'm very thankful for the minister's, personal commitment. To striking that panel. I know that he's already spent some significant time himself, meeting with patients and parents. I was there when he spoke to them, and there's no doubt that this minister, I feel understands the issue and wants to help. And I think, but that's just one of the rare diseases that we've heard about. Today we have two more on top of that, and we can't go about it, in this piecemeal way of, when someone comes through saying we're gonna review the criteria or we're gonna set up a panel, let's look at it from a broad perspective of how we go about helping all of those in Ontario with rare diseases. And I think the select committee would be a good first step on top of those things that he's already committing to do.
Talk to him at all about the select committee?
I've broached it with him slightly. The last time we had a chance to chat was about the EDS folks, so I wanted to be the focus on them. I have a question to the minister this morning in the legislature, and I'm hopeful that he will agree to my call to strike a select committee and get this moving forward so that.
Why do you have to wait till February 25th?
Well, that's when my ballot date is. I'm starting it now. We're rolling it out across the province. Again, it coincides with World Rare Disease Day at the end of the month, the 29th of February. Obviously, that's a rare day in itself. But I'll be debating my motion. I'll be debating my motion on the last Thursday of February because that's my ballot date.